Thank you for tuning in. This is Jaeson Cooper, and you are listening to the Zeitgeist Radio Podcast. We have a very exciting episode for you tonight entitled Open Source Innovation, Overcoming the Repercussions and Limitations of Monetary Economics. In this episode, we'll bring attention to particular trends emerging in virtually every industry regarding how open source philosophy is being applied. Now, my main focus in this movement is researching the methods for a transition to a natural law resource-based economy from our current circumstance within the monetary system. Now, there are many questions and criticisms about the movement regarding the transition, and certainly I can't address all of them in one episode. However, I can begin to provide information currently available for people to begin to understand how the transition is not only viable, but already happening to a certain extent. I would also like to emphasize that there's a saying floating around, nature is open source. So if we seek to create a civilization based on natural law, it would operate on the open source protocols. In this hour, I'll be presenting real projects, real startups, organizations, and policies, many of which have only come to be in the past decade. Some have only started up in the past few years. This is a very exciting time, as many of these examples have the potential to completely reshape the industries they represent. And as we all know, the resource-based economic model operates on access and availability, which are fundamental components to open source application. So I recommend having a browser open or a notebook ready, because I'll bring up many examples of very interesting projects you may want to look into and follow up with. Now, we should start by defining what open source actually is. The term open source implies the source, the work, the provisions are open for anyone to use, contribute, modify, or suggest how the outcome will be produced. Traditionally, restrictive provision and reward-based incentive were thought to produce the most innovative behaviors in human beings. Of course, this is the first argument against making projects open source, is the incentive under a scarcity-based economic system. Who is going to work for free, or how will a company make money if they give away their software for free? As most of us know, incentive is not exclusively governed by monetary gain, and there are certainly business models within the monetary system that benefit from making their projects open source. And though these tactics have been applicable in certain environments, some fundamental revelations have been made in the science of human motivation, innovation, and creativity. We have come to understand the foremost prevailing drive in motivating human creativity is the full knowledge that the produced results will be made available for the greater good. People are far more innovative, creative, and productive when they are working towards a goal they believe will serve a greater value system. Now, there's a video floating around that perfectly describes this. It's called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. It's by RSA Animate. It's from Daniel Pink. It's on Vimeo and YouTube. I know the video has also been mentioned before in previous radio shows, but it does an excellent job at explaining what actually drives human motivation when it comes to creative principles. So the basic premise is that true creative incentive is derived from the value of contribution and social achievement. The scientists in the lab working day and night to develop a more effective treatment for cancer, they're not doing it for the paycheck. There is a huge social value attached to the outcome of that work, which is driving the incentive. And that is what powers the passion behind the productivity regarding these projects. Conventionally, open source referred to software. Coders and programmers could work together over mutual agreements to write, produce, and distribute software on an open source platform. The source code is made available to the public. That enables other programmers and coders to make their own modifications to it, suggest those improvements, and further contribute to the evolution of the software. This may be perceived as a security risk, yet the availability of source code allows other programmers to examine and verify the genuine functions of the software. Many aspects of open source philosophy removes the limitations of proprietary, profit-based, and otherwise restrictive licensing on privatized software. Copyright was originally intended to protect the writer or artist from having their content taken from a large corporation and used for profit while the artist or writer made very little from their own work. It has since become a tool for large corporations to exploit those who may access this content with no intention of profiting from it. perfect example in real time would be the high schooler downloading pirated music ends up with a massive lawsuit on their doorstep even though they had no intention of redistributing it. So what the open source platform does is it's also been applied to this idea of copyright in the form of copyleft, most notably the Creative Commons licensing project, in which artists can submit their content to be distributed and shared with the simple accreditation to the original source. Rather than dealing with royalty payments or restricted licensing policies, they just seek credit and a link to their own source or work. The Creative Commons is a licensing protocol that involves allowing designs, media, art, and other projects to be cited, reused, remixed, and built up with a system of accreditation instead of a royalty collection. Many artists see this as beneficial as it allows more people to share their work and generate more attention to their talents. And you can look up plenty of examples to this. A notable quote by Jonathan Colton, who made over $500,000 from his music in 2010, he said, "I give away music because I want to make music, and I can't make music unless I make money, and I won't make money unless I get heard, and I won't get heard unless I give away music." Now, understandably, we are still operating under the monetary system, as this quote acknowledges, but in a resource-based economy, artists and creative types would be performing and providing their art to the world for free, and this would be freely shared and properly accredited, which, as we know, is probably the highest aspiration an artist would want, for people all over the world to appreciate their work. Now, when it comes to information, people were viewing Wikipedia as this unreliable side project during its initial introduction. As we all know, Wikipedia is now one of the leading sources of information on the web. Being open source in nature, it has also spawned many other relevant academic and creative outlets for information sharing. It's probably one of the best examples of a global open source platform that has a very relevant purpose in serving the global community. Now, education is one of my favorite subjects, and this is potentially some of the largest implications of reshaping our global civilization to a world of abundance. I want to begin by reading off some basic statistics on internet growth over the last 20 years, because this is a very exciting topic, and in order to fully grasp the implications, it's important we understand how fast the internet has been growing and how fast the human population has been getting connected to the internet over the past 2 decades, and where these rates will take us over the next several decades. So, back in 1995, about 0.5% of the human population were connected to the internet, about 16 million. 8 years later, in 2003, it passes 10% of the world's population having internet access. Skip ahead to 2011, we have 30% of the world's population with internet access. And as of March 2014, an estimated 40% of the world's population has access to the internet. Now, the key word here is access. Access to a technical system of information sharing on a global scale. So if you just look at the numbers and watch the trends of how fast this technology is reaching the developing world and what percent of the world will have internet access as time progresses, we can start to understand how powerful the following projects can really be. Educational researcher Sugata Mitra is the winner of the 2013 TED Prize. His wish is to build a school in the cloud where children can explore and learn from one another. He essentially left a few computers secured in public walls where children in the village could access them at any time. Within a matter of months, these kids were teaching themselves biology and other academic subjects along with the English language. The results improved over time. I would highly recommend checking out this TED Talk if you haven't seen it already. To spell his name, it's Sugata Mitra. It represents enormous potential of a simple internet connection in regards to educating oneself of relevant subjects and how we could assist in educating the developing world through technology. When it comes to online open source education, Wikipedia is a shining example we are all very familiar with. There's also many other sources out there as well. There's OSS Watch, which provides tips for selecting open source or free and open software. There's the Open Source Educational Foundation and Open Source Initiative. Creative Commons has a number of open projects from the Khan Academy to Kuriki, where teachers and parents can find educational materials for children to learn about Creative Commons licensing. Khan Academy also has a whole variety of academic sources which are applicable in and out of the classroom. Also, they recently launched the School of Open that offers courses on the meaning, application, and impact of openness. Numerous open or open educational resource databases and search engines also exist. Some examples include the OEDb, over 10,000 free courses from universities as well as reviews of colleges and rankings of college degree programs. There's Open Tapestry, which has over 100,000 open license online learning resources for an academic and general audience. There is OER Commons, which has over 40,000 open educational resources from elementary school through higher education, and many of the elementary, middle, and high school resources are aligned to the Common Core state standards. I know there's a lot of controversy around that, but it's good to know the open source community is already on it. There is Open Content, a blog, definition, and game of open source, as well as a friendly search engine for open educational resources from MIT, Stanford, and other universities with subject and description listings. There's Academic Earth, which has over 1,500 video lectures from MIT, Stanford, Berkeley, Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. There's also the Joint Information Systems Committee, which works on behalf of the UK higher education and involved in many open resources and open projects. So many exciting ventures on the horizon and many exciting applications which are currently available. I would also like to point out most of these resources I just listed have only sprung up in the past 10 years. Imagine what the implications are for the incoming generation who have all this access. These digital educational platforms also contain another major advantage of research into the science of learning. We now have the ability to apply A/B testing and data analytics on learning trends among large pools of users. Just to clarify, A/B testing is when you do a scientific analysis on two groups of people by providing different conditions for each group and determining the more successful outcome in regards to their behavior. It is mostly used in marketing now, but it also fits with educational applications as well. It holds a great deal of potential for fine-tuning future teaching methods and provisions of educational delivery systems. Speaking on delivery methods, in these advancements in educational interactive media, we now have more possibilities for more engaging educational activities. One industry with largely untapped potential would be educational video games. Video games, which get upwards of 3 billion hours a week worldwide, could be the next delivery method for educational content. Now, most people associate video games with entertainment, and that is absolutely true. The interactive level of such an engaging form of media can keep the human mind focused on immediate tasks and guide the player's behavior towards achievable goals. These tasks and goals can be designed to be educational in nature. These formats also allow data feedback and progress tracking, as mentioned earlier. This is simple human behavior. It is becoming widely understood that we need to adapt the educational curriculum to the interests of the children rather than trying to force the children to adapt their interests to the curriculum. Teenagers spend more hours playing video games than they do engaging in school or doing schoolwork. According to a study done by the Kaiser Family Foundation, the average adolescent between the ages of 8 and 18 will dedicate an average of 53 hours a week to entertainment media, most notably video games. Of course, television and computer time also factor into that statistic. These mediums of information delivery win out over homework and reading for sheer fact that they are more engaging and more stimulating to the mind of a growing human being. It is not necessarily the content of violence or the lack of educational content which makes this appear more attractive. It is the highly interactive and challenging tasks provided by this medium. It is that simple if you want kids to learn. Design a learning environment conducive to their interests. And if you think media cannot have any effect on a child's behavior, look at what the monetary system has done with many of the world's leading experts in child psychology. They migrate to the best-paying jobs, which are usually in the marketing field. They can design a 30-second ad that will motivate thousands of children to nag their parents into buying sugary cereal or some other junk food. which could eventually lead to unhealthy eating habits that would eventually lead to detrimental diseases like diabetes or heart disease. So if experts in child psychology are capable of doing that in a 30-second ad, what could they be capable of doing in the 8 hours children attend educational institutions? So if experts in child psychology are capable of doing that in a 30-second ad, what could they be capable of doing in the 8 hours we have children attend educational institutions? If they were assigned the task of developing the most efficient and effective tactics in teaching, how different would this updated educational system be? What resources and innovations would be applied to equip the new system? And what would teachers have access to at that point? For example, a current math class will assign a worksheet with 50 practice problems, and the student will use a pencil to write the problems down on a paper showing their work. Imagine if instead the teacher assigned a simple flash game that was free online and every student had to play the game until they reached level 50. Of course, the video game sounds far more attractive to your typical teenager than homework on paper, and the idea of getting to level 50 sounds more exciting than doing 50 questions. The game could also have real-time automated assistance and switch up variables so kids couldn't cheat off each other. It could also have a background storyline attached to it to keep it interesting and engaging. It could track progress, what areas each individual student had trouble in, and what strengths each student had too. This would all be recorded into an easy-to-read report that would be directly sent to the teacher. On the teacher's end, without ever needing to grade any of the homework papers, they can directly see the progress and full analytics on each student. So the teacher is far more equipped to provide in-room assistance with any areas the student might be struggling in. From a technical perspective, this frees up a great deal of time for the teacher and makes the assignment process far more engaging and leaves room for further updates. Now understand, there are legitimate companies and organizations out there making educational video games. However, they are largely underfunded or rely on private commercial ventures to make themselves available. So think about this. I'm not saying we should get rid of teachers or the classroom or conventional real-time methods of teaching. I am saying there are much-needed supplemental methods to be applied. In a monetary system, a teacher gets paid a yearly salary to teach a class of 20 or 30 kids. In the event a video game designer were to work on a game for a year on the same salary, that game could be copied and made available to every student in the world who has a computer. The game could also be played year after year, but of course there would most likely be updates for future projects. The delivery methods of digital interactive educational platforms are far more comprehensive and efficient compared to conventional models. The notion that these programs are not receiving more funding to be made widely available is just another example of how absurd traditional monetary economic policies can be surrounding education and classroom innovation. The good news, open source educational video games do exist. However, there are very few at this point in history. Luckily, the conversation is heating up. There are TED Talks out there on these subjects. Do a quick search, you are sure to find them. And I should also mention, video games are applicable to more than just education. They have industrial, medical, and real-world problem-solving applications as well. So moving forward, the open source philosophy has also been applied to computer hardware in some notable projects. When it comes to computer hardware, the Arduino module has been very popular for a wide range of applications. Arduino can sense the environment by receiving input from a variety of sensors, and it can affect its surroundings by controlling lights, motors, and other actuators. All software, hardware, and applications are open source and freely available online. The boards can be built by hand or purchased pre-assembled. The software can be downloaded for free. The CAD files are available under an open source license, and you're free to adapt them to your own needs. This is very promising news, as there are 3D printers entering the current market that can print circuit boards. So beyond open source hardware you can buy and assemble, you will have the option of downloading hardware designs and printing them out yourself. This opens many doors for the future of electronics and open source technology, especially since earlier in April the almost completely open source laptop went on sale. And the idea of open source computers holds quite the significance, as there's been criticisms of potential security flaws in proprietary hardware. To give you an example, there's been some criticisms regarding the security of various proprietary random number generator chips, which are central to cryptographic protocols regarding cybersecurity in modern-day computers. Due to their proprietary nature, it's illegal to dissect and audit the hardware component of these chips. It is also extremely difficult as they are contained in a sealed plastic module that would get destroyed in any attempt to dissect them. Some rumors claim that they contain unverified backdoors that the NSA or other hackers could exploit. You can look up the full story by searching Linux random number generator exploit. And trust me, this issue applies to more than just Linux operating systems. It was just the open source community making the most noise about it when the Linux operating system decided to use one of these proprietary chips in one of the cryptographic protocols within the system. Now, to keep this simple, if the hardware components were open source, engineers and programmers could verify the integrity without having these issues become a large unknown mystery. And to be fair, this has larger implications than just securing your own personal files and connections. There has even been criticisms of these backdoor exploits being present in drone and automated military systems. Now, we all know the military isn't about to declare operations open source anytime soon, but it still outlines some major repercussions of proprietary restrictions within the monetary system. Now, some would argue that a large tech company would be able to fix these flaws without needing the whole world to verify their integrity. But in reality, this happens all the time. Even companies like Facebook had a blatant flaw in their security, and in one case it took a Palestinian hacker to post a bug report on Mark Zuckerberg's private wall to bring attention to one of these bugs. Just search Facebook bug Zuckerberg's wall, you're sure to find it. Now, 3D printing is a subject most of us are very familiar with. The idea of having a 3D printer and being able to download designs for actual 3D objects, parts, and devices is now a reality. These visible files are typically open source in nature and meant to be shared. Also, they're updatable. They can be designs to anything from a Guy Fawkes mask to a modular component for a prosthetic limb. And if you haven't seen what 3D printers have been doing for prosthetic limbs, I would recommend looking these up because there are some very heartwarming and inspirational stories coming out of this aspect of the technology. Also, if you haven't heard of the RepRap project, I highly recommend checking that out. It's an open source 3D printer that can print most of the parts of its own design. Virtually a self-replicating open source technology, although assembly is still required. And these are only the options of the current consumer-grade 3D printers. In medical labs, they've already begun printing human organs, which makes you wonder where that could lead moving forward. But cloning and synthetic biology is a discussion for later. There's also a comical story about how NASA developed a 3D printer for food production in space. So we all may have 3D food printers in our kitchen someday, and that would replace every appliance. And we'd be sharing open source recipes via foodable files as opposed to visible files in the future. Another exciting aspect is 3D printing buildings, also known as contour crafting. Now, this has been brought up in the films. However, there are organizations working to make open source architecture the future of contour crafting availability. WikiHouse, for example, is a non-profit project developing hardware and software which is open and shared in the commons and owned by everyone. WikiHouse works off some lumber and composite-based material, so it's not entirely a printed house, but it is still very relevant to the open source architecture transition. They aim to provide highly material-efficient designs with simplistic construction methods for do-it-yourself projects in developing countries. This is just one of many projects involving the replacement of proprietary copywritten architecture designs through Creative Commons design sharing. The Open Architecture Network is a very fun site to explore, actually, as it brings together the world's open source building designs. Some very notable projects are being presented by this network, such as the Exoshelter project. Some of you may have seen this, actually. The Exoshelter project builds stackable, portable, reusable shelters for disaster relief operations. They stack up like coffee cups, so more than a dozen can fit on a single truck. They snap together for easy setup and have plumbing and power options already built in. They cost less than $5,000 each, and the design is very simple, cost-efficient, and made from recyclable materials. I encourage you to explore the Open Architecture Network if contour crafting and open source building design interests you. If you work in architecture or if you want to contribute, They also host design contests and have built up a very helpful community network. Now, beyond this type of hardware, there are some very interesting developments in the realm of mechanical technologies. Patenting was originally meant to protect the inventor from having their idea taken by a large corporation and have that corporation produce and profit from it, while the original inventor loses out on their royalties or credit. Now, patenting, like copyright, has since become a very complicated system to file paperwork, paying patenting fees, restricting access to particular designs, and essentially restricting potential innovation by avoiding these infringements. Now, for example, some companies who might profit from an inferior technology may buy up patents to a new technology which is far more beneficial and efficient for use, yet would render their inefficient, expensive technology obsolete. This is true of Chevron and Texaco in buying up electric car battery patents. And in our time of digital databasing, unified CAD designs, and user-based submission systems, all of these should remove the need for many conventional protocols of patent fees, paperwork, and clunky procedures in submitting patent ideas for new innovations. Many people, many inventors, do not have the money to submit patents and pay thousands of dollars up front just to get one invention out that might not go anywhere if a venture capitalist doesn't pick it up for distribution. Now, a popular solution to this is the Open Source Ecology Project, and this is actually on the global website. It's an amazing project. There's a lot of potential behind it and completely reshaping the way the industry functions. Now, they're developing an open source industrial machine database that can be made for a fraction of the commercial costs and sharing all designs online for free. This is everything from brick ovens to bread ovens to tractors to cars to trucks and even houses. The goal of open source ecology is to create an open source economy, an efficient economy that increases innovation by open collaboration. And this is still in its infancy. Right now, the technologies are backyard tractors and brick ovens, but the platform is already set up for a global collaboration effort to redesign our industrial approach to technology. The viable concept of open source technology holds major implications for the future of manufacturing, automation, and robotics. Imagine the implications of having open source factories, which have already been proposed, by the way, in some crowdfunding campaigns. These trends are paving the way towards the production systems of a resource-based economy. Even social networking has gone open source in the Diaspora project. That's Diaspora. Instead of a central corporation like Facebook owning and selling all of the information of the users, Diaspora is an open source platform where users can own and control their own data and what is shared over their own networks. The servers are provided voluntarily by user hosts who, in some cases, multi-purpose the server networks to also enable cryptographic storage protocols for added privacy. It's a very exciting concept that will probably get more popular as the users of the commercial sites get more and more fed up with the invasion of privacy and data mining taking place by the commercial interests. Social networking has a pivotal role to play in organizing protests and rallies, especially in recent years. It has also been very useful for the Zeitgeist Movement as well. Now, I know there are some fears floating around about internet censorship and, what if the government shuts down the internet? Many people see how impractical such an outcome would be, but in some countries this has been the reality. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge briefly an open source solution around this fear. An additional open source internet has been in the works for voluntary implementation. MeshNet is an open source platform for a newly redesigned internet model. This network allows each user to act as their own transfer node, and the communication between the nodes can either be wired or wireless, most commonly the Wi-Fi router in your own home. This model of data transfer is even more decentralized than the internet we currently use. Living room servers and MeshNet technology may become a widely implemented component to the current internet model in the future. If you ever log into your home Wi-Fi network and see all the other networks of your neighbors, understand those all could be potential nodes in a MeshNet. And this is not some fringy technology spawned from some dark corner of the internet. This technology has already been implemented in many industrial practices, whether it's a military outpost or an open pit mining operation, In many real-world scenarios, various conditions require meshnet protocols for on-site communication as the most effective method. Now, this next issue is open source science, overcoming current obstacles in scientific progress. This has been getting more attention with the recent open access campaign. What's going on is a great deal of scientific research today in the monetary system is done for profit-based incentives. This is mostly in the realm of pharmaceutical research firms and commercial institutions that operate off the research and development business model. In order for many aspects of this model to function in a monetary economy, these advancements which take place are restricted from public knowledge. Research is kept in secrecy while findings are directed towards patents under secrecy, and publishing is highly restrictive due to the profit-based journal systems. Meaning a company that spends several $1 million on researching the effects of one compound that is effective at reducing blood pressure wants to make a profit from that discovery and earn exclusive rights to sell that compound. Proprietary restriction keeps the research behind the medicine unpublished. This ensures the research exclusively supports the profit margins and the company funding it. Scientific journals are also highly selective of what materials should be published, and the costs associated with publishing can also be discouraging as well. Another huge leap forward in open source science is the open access permissions of publicly funded research. Open access means unrestricted online access to peer-reviewed scholarly research. Open access emphasizes not only having access to the articles and the studies, but allowing usage of them in citation or even platform applications. Providing large volumes of scientific research and search engine-style pattern detection programs can allow for conclusions to be derived from multiple scientific studies which may not have been readily available to a single entity prior to the advent of open access. This is a far more effective use of research which has already been done, in collaborating further findings which could greatly benefit scientific advancements. Now, there's other ventures around the world doing very similar work. There's Open Source Drug Discovery. It's an institution out of India that promotes open knowledge on drugs and treatments for some of the world's most common preventable and treatable diseases. Certain legal frameworks across various countries also have proprietary expiration before certain pharmaceutical compounds can be made generic. Now, there are a few TED Talks I would recommend if you're interested in learning more. Now, one TED Talk people should see is by Ben Goldacre, and it's called What Doctors Don't Know About the Drugs They Prescribe. He goes over the issue of how scientific journals are not publishing negative or inconclusive findings, and this leaves doctors and researchers in the dark about what our actual scientific knowledge is. Another talk I would recommend is called Open Source Cancer Research. It's by Jay Bradner, and this is basically, he explains the benefits of turning scientific industries open source and how much benefit that can provide for public health and scientific progress. Now, these are fundamental principles which a resource-based economy would operate on, not to mention the benefit these methods could provide for public health today. There's something to be said about peer review and allowing administrative guidelines to be made more open, instead of restricting open criticism backed by scientific research against administrative policies backed by profit-based incentive. Public health is a victim from the lack of oversight derived from open criticism in defining publicly appointed dietary guidelines which are meant to be based on science. The scientific process has also been made highly commercialized, and this is made clear by corrupted administrations which are left to interpret the quote-unquote scientific data for public health. A common criticism of the USDA and FDA include the conflicts of interest which have influence within the approval process. A scientific paper produced by Jeff Herman outlines specific examples of this, and there are many. If you are interested in reading more, the paper is available online if you search USDA Conflicts of Interest, Jeff Herman. The entire paper outlines many cases where scientific data was ignored or overlooked in the development of nutritional guidelines for the United States. And this is not the only physician making noise about the issue. Conflicts of interest in dietary guidelines go back for decades, all the way back to the McDougall Report. This is not only a threat to human health, but a threat to public scientific integrity as a whole. These outcomes also stem into what industries get subsidized and what policies favor particular economic outcomes, even if those outcomes result in disease-promoting foods receiving subsidies. There's plenty to be said about high fructose corn syrup and pesticides in our groundwater for another talk. The major problem I want to address with commercial scientific research in nutrition stems from the lack of actual scientific application when funding sources provide profit-based incentives for particular findings. This is no longer science. This is highly disruptive marketing in the form of falsifying or biasing scientific research. There was another study done that proves this hands down. It was on the relationship between funding source and conclusion among nutrition-related scientific articles. That's the name of the paper. For interventional studies, which is the gold standard in nutritional science, the proportion with unfavorable conclusions was 0% for all industry-funded studies versus 37% for non-industry-funded studies. In the conclusion, they stated, industry funding of nutrition-related scientific articles may bias conclusions in favor of sponsors' products, with potentially significant implications for public health. And of course, this was a direct result of the industrial profit incentive directed by the monetary system. Now, if scientific review for public guidelines could be openly criticized using scientific evidence and community directives rather than review boards that could be bought out or bribed out, we may see an entirely different set of nutritional guidelines. A modern-day example of this would be the public dietary guidelines of Greece, the country. They have a much more plant-based orientation in their nutritional guidelines, recommending people eat red meat less than once a month. Now, there may be many listeners who enjoy steak and burgers, but there are many scientific studies that support that guideline. While the U.S. guideline heavily emphasizes daily meat and dairy consumption, if you look into the members of review boards which produce these guidelines, you'll end up finding former members of the beef and cattle lobby, the egg lobby, the dairy, even salt and sugar associations. When there is money to be made off selling unhealthy food, there will be a clear effort to promote it in every way possible, even if that means redirecting dietary guidelines away from what the actual scientific evidence is suggesting. For example, in the United States, the MyPlate dietary guidelines are very oversimplified, calling for a quarter of your daily food intake to be protein. However, if you read into the suggestions from myplate.gov, they don't even recommend the best sources. They just categorize all the protein sources under commonly consumed protein, with no reference as to what protein is healthy and unhealthy. To be fair, they have vague suggestions, and even those suggestions are not based on scientific evidence. Now, if you go to the Harvard Official Healthy Eating Plate Guidelines, the first recommendation is to stay active. The second recommendation is to stay plant-based. The dietary guidelines recommended by Harvard Medical, one of the most respected scientific research outlets for human nutrition, directly contradict the recommendations for the dairy intake boasted by the MyPlate program within the United States. They also directly contradict a large portion of the meat intake guidelines. Harvard Medical specifically states to avoid red meat, bacon, eggs, cheese, and other cold-cut processed meats. And Harvard is not the only source making these recommendations based on sound scientific evidence. So some might be thinking, what can any governing body really do as far as promoting public health, since most people make their own choices regarding what they eat? Now let's take, for example, Finland. They had a very meat-heavy diet following World War II, and eventually had the highest cardiac mortality rates in the world, along with high rates of other diseases like cancer. In 1972, the government and organizations put together what is known as the North Karelia Program. This was a program which promoted health education through the school system and media and public awareness campaigns. The main driving messages were to reduce or eliminate the intake of animal fat and animal products. There were many aspects of this program, but some major ones included convincing consumers to replace butter with olive oil in cooking, and other campaigns even provided subsidies and tax incentives for dairy farms to convert to berry farms. So instead of producing a large amount of meat and dairy, the agricultural industry of Finland was steering towards fruits packed with antioxidants and other beneficial nutrients. Now, these recommendations were all based on scientific evidence regarding human nutrition, which resulted in what is boasted as the most effective public health campaign in human history. The results speak for themselves. By 1995, the annual mortality rate of coronary heart disease in middle-aged men in North Karelia was reduced by 73% from pre-program years. This reduction was especially rapid in men in their 70s and in their 80s. During the last 10 years, the decline in coronary heart disease mortality had been approximately 8% per year. Among women, the reduction in cardiovascular disease mortality has been the same magnitude among men. By 1995, the annual coronary heart disease mortality among men in Finland was reduced by 65%. At the same time, the lung cancer mortality was also reduced by more than 70%, and 60% in all of Finland. With greatly reduced cardiovascular and cancer mortality, the all-cause mortality was reduced by 45%, leading to also a greater life expectancy, approximately 7 years for men and 6 years for women. And you can read about this on the World Health Organization's website. Just search North Karelia Successful, and you are sure to find plenty of articles on the North Karelia program. To give you a comparison, heart disease is the number one cause of death in both men and women for the United States, claiming approximately 1 million lives annually. Every 33 seconds, somebody in the United States dies from cardiovascular disease, which is roughly the equivalent of a September 11th-like tragedy repeating itself every 24 hours, every day of the year. 250,000 Americans die annually of sudden cardiac death. 1/2 of the victims of sudden cardiac death are under the age of 65. An estimated 80 million Americans have one or more types of heart disease. This is the reality of cardiovascular diseases in this country. And compared to Finland, how many of these could be preventable through proper diet and nutrition through public health awareness campaigns? Arguably close to 600,000 lives every year. And that's just the United States. And yet the foods that are causing these diseases are advertised on every popular channel on TV, even to children. If we implemented similar strategies, and with time, I will admit, if we were to see similar results, we would potentially save the lives of 600,000 Americans every year from cardiac mortality, and roughly 1 million lives every year total if the proportional numbers were to line up. Of course, the culture which has been produced by the profit-based industrial incentives paint healthy eating as expensive, inconvenient, or otherwise not worth it. And the idea of removing such foods as steak, bacon, or ice cream from one's diet is seen as impossible or not worth it because the taste of these foods will be missed. The culture has also displaced the view of health to such a degree that we are negating our own bodily condition. Millions of people are dying due to the cultural stigmas in place that negate the value of personal health. This is partially the result of the institutionalized refusal to acknowledge actual scientific data in human health and nutrition. And this is purely food and nutrition. Harvard Medical published another study claiming 45,000 Americans every year die from not having adequate health insurance. This is how distorted our cultural value system is regarding personal health. This is the result of publicly managed resources being directed to an agricultural industry operating on a profit-based monetary incentive and a profit-based oriented healthcare system. In a resource-based economy where dietary guidelines and provisions would be specifically catered to desired taste and health selection of the local demands, public health and nutritional provisions would be embraced and directed by sound scientific evidence which would be open source in nature and publicly verifiable. In addition to the options to continuously update the scientific knowledge base of human health and nutritional science, no one would ever need to die from foodborne illnesses. And I highly recommend to anyone listening to research nutrition and learn to debunk all of these fad diets which hold very little relevance to modern-day scientific research. When it comes to public resource management regarding technological development, most engineering is done in the private sector, even with public funds for military-based projects. Most of these technological developments and research ventures are done in secret in order to protect patent rights and profit margins. The ability to restrict technical knowledge to the general population allows that restriction to become a staple of advantage in an open market and an artificial scarcity to then turn a profit from, even though the initial investment funds were sourced from public tax dollars. This has restricted developments in electric car batteries, supercapacitor technologies, while funneling trillions of public dollars towards unelected weapon development systems. Imagine if instead of the federal government funding private military engineering projects, it funded the development of an open-source CAD sharing platform, which rewarded the most efficient, effective designs for electric cars or renewable energy technologies, or any other relevant consumer goods. This would bring every research firm in the world on board with a collaborative global effort to improve technological developments on a scale never before seen. Since the award system of public resource allocation would then place the most effective designs into production, we would then be streamlining the collaboration efforts into viable technical solutions every industry in the world could replicate, produce, and improve on, since it would be open source. Now, it's very important to make this connection. Open source applications are public goods. They are public resources for everyone, just like public parks, public libraries, and public schools. So the question comes into play. By variance of the benefit we receive from open source applications, do they deserve recognition in the realm of public funding? Ironically, most of them are produced purely through voluntary means or funded by crowdfunding communities and nonprofits. Though, to be fair, there are business models that operate off open source availability. Now, crowdfunding is a recent innovation which represents a democratic method of resource allocation in the long run. Speaking of crowdfunding and public resource allocation, I would also like to bring attention to this real-world scenario. There are multiple crowdfunding platforms that actually work towards civic public projects, for example, public parks or playgrounds and other public resources. So there are already methods of producing public resources without the need for the government or taxation systems to function in the process. Think about how that would play into a transition towards a resource-based economy. If we understand a population that could be fully educated and fully informed on the current state and progress of technology, there would be a global open source platform in directing public resources and talents of all scopes to various projects, innovations, and discoveries. We would effectively be removing all restrictions and limitations to technological development, scientific progress, and essentially human betterment, as we continue to update the standard of living through technology produced by our automated open source factories. I want to point out that every industry I mentioned is already in a state of transition. I also want to bring attention back to software, where it all started. Software design is usually not considered a scientific progress by those who don't work in the industry. However, it is a vanguard to virtually all development and technical advancements. Proprietary software has been a dominant presence in the commercial industry. It is understandable that private profits are required to pay programmers for their efforts within this monetary system. However, the restrictive nature of proprietary software can inhibit certain components of the developed software from helping or assisting in non-commercial ventures which hold potential for social contribution. This legal framework has given rise to the highly inefficient and restrictive business model of patent trolling. Now, patent trolling has become a major issue in the realm of tech startups. A quick search will reveal many entrepreneurs in the tech startup field sometimes need more lawyers on their teams than actual developers. The legal grounds for developing new products, technologies, or services has become so complicated by the restrictions in place, many are claiming this is choking out a large potential for future innovations. Patent trolling is the intentional patenting of software concepts that certain institutions might not even develop, for the sheer sake of eliminating the potential for competition from the design they made a conceptual patent for, or to simply profit from a lawsuit of definable infringements which may come about years later. According to RPX Corporation, a firm that helps reduce company patent litigation risk, patent trolls in 2012 filed more than 2,900 infringement lawsuits nationwide. Many examples exist, even the JPEG image format, intended to be free of license fees. It was subject to a few patent attacks, one as late as 2009. These practices stifle innovation and cause enormous inefficiencies within the monetary methods of current business models. However, open source software is becoming more recognized as a viable industry standard. Open source software research can be done through platforms and services like GitHub, which streamline the process of connecting to other developers and feedback audiences for projects regarding open source software development. This also opens up doors for cross-platform applications and allows more commercial institutions to comfortably utilize these applications without needing to concern themselves with licensing restriction. Considering the resource-based economic model would be based on an open source platform which manages the Earth's resources, it is important to make knowledge of these resources freely available. Understanding one of the major steps in establishing a global natural law resource-based economy would be the planetary survey. A survey must be done of all available resources of the planet. This would be done in conjunction with the establishment of a planetary monitoring system. This survey would collect information on virtually every identifiable variable pertaining to localized regions. The survey and eventually the established monitoring sensor array would assist in establishing the most effective and efficient system possible for sustainable resource extraction. The knowledge of the Earth's resources is not currently disclosed on an open platform. An example of this restriction could be the recent event of Shell Oil prospecting the Arctic Ocean for drilling. Fortunately, they recently announced they will not be deep-sea drilling in the Arctic as there are cold water coral reef ecosystems in the prospected areas. It may have been a technical practicality that swayed their final decision, but it was actually a Greenpeace submarine that discovered the coral and notified the public. It was not Shell Oil making the announcement, even though they had been prospecting that area for quite some time before Greenpeace got up there. So this makes you question whether or not Shell Oil would have done the same in their own discoveries. If there are resources that can benefit the development of our civilization, it is important for that information to be available to the public, instead of remaining hidden under some private extraction stake of a profit-based industry. An open-source economic model would not only include and implement all of the previously stated innovations, but also implement an open-source government, in which politicians, corrupted private interest groups, and hostile authority were designed out of the system. If the citizens of this network had their own account in which they arranged their methods of social contribution, their occupations, their public contributions, and their participation in product, resource, or other service demands, this would also include demand regarding public projects through direct resource allocation, rather than electing some bought-out political puppet to spend money for them. An open-source, public resource management system would function far more efficiently and more in alignment with actualized public demand than what we see today. The open-source philosophy applied to civilization itself has the potential to bring forth a new industrial revolution. As progress streamlines into open ventures, the avenue towards a resource-based economy becomes more of a reality. Coming full circle, I said in the beginning of this podcast that nature is open source. Every organism in nature makes itself available to interact with its environment and other organisms which assist in the evolution of every system in nature. Whether it is a fruit-bearing tree providing access to its fruit for animals to spread the seeds, or a bunny developing faster muscle function to escape the wolf. Every organism which interacts with every other organism is assisting in the design of every entity within the systems of nature. Nature as a system has developed life as an applicable product to the most relevant functions of immediate environmental subjective experience. Through time, the systems of nature and the experience of life have emerged to become more symbiotic, resulting in higher orders of complexity. The systems of nature provide a universal process of trial and error, in addition to the internalized systems of both biology and behavior on behalf of life itself. The relationship to life and nature are unified in systems of constant change and further advancement. Much like our process of science and technological development, we apply the laws of nature to trial, error, and creative applications to further advance our own designs and awareness. Since we seek to develop a functioning system incorporating the values of human experience, environmental sustainability, and efficient methods of production, education and human development should take a central role in developing the intellectual resources of the entire population. This will ensure all other elements of the civilization retain integrity in their function and future evolution. Intelligence is fully encompassing when dealing with an entire civilization. Not only should the population itself and all of its citizens be educated to the full capacity of the civilization's intelligence potential, but also the systems of the civilization itself must be intelligently designed and managed. The transition of human civilization must remain peaceful, yet highly strategic, guided by the intelligent implementation of innovative solutions, human creativity, and compassionate values. The transition is not about overthrowing the government or any idea related to a violent uprising. The systems proposed in this episode are described as supplementary, however hold the potential to be increasingly operational on their own integrity in order to be fully operational when the old systems can no longer function. Some may believe that a certain collapse must be necessary for such a transition to occur. However, this way of thinking is not acknowledging the potential for developing a seeded construct of a new system within the current one. I'd like to conclude tonight's episode with a quote from Buckminster Fuller. "You never change things by fighting the existing system. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." I'd like to thank you for tuning in to my first podcast. This has been Jaeson Cooper, signing out till next time. Have a great night.